everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my October wrap up, and I feel like I say this in every video, but I'm gonna do things a little bit differently this time. I'm still really just trying to figure out how I want to do this. So I am tired. I'm tired of having to edit hour-and-a-half long videos. I feel like they're not fun to watch, they're not fun to edit, they're not fun to film. So this time I'm going to attempt to talk about just my favorite and least favorite books that I read in the month of October, because I did read 30 books in October and I'm tired of going through books chronologically and saying first I read this book and here's what I think about it and next I read this book. If you care that much about every single book I read, you can just go read my Storygraph reviews, which probably takes a lot less time anyways. So this time I'm just going to be focusing on my favorite books, my least favorite books, or books that I thought were that I otherwise have a lot to say about. Let's just get right into it. I've got my Storygraph open on my iPad, I've got my reading journal, and I'm ready. So first of all, I have to talk about The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling, because this was a book that I was really looking forward to and that I thought would be so up my alley. Like, it is gothic, it's a medieval castle under siege and they're running out of food, and then all of a sudden these saints appear bringing food and plenty and throwing all these lavish parties, and so it's like that religious fever dream aspect stuck in a siege. Maybe we're turning to cannibalism, where is this food coming from? And there's lesbians, toxic lesbian relationships, and like that's all so up my alley, and I should have loved this book. Like, on paper it's like somebody sat down and wrote lesbian terror, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, and it's like that is perfect for me. I love that. But unfortunately, the writing style of this book and the pacing and plotting just really prevented me from enjoying it. I could tell from like basically the first chapter that I wasn't gonna like it because of the writing style. So if you start to read this book and you're like, I don't understand them, like I am totally fine with the writing style, I love the writing style, then you may have a much better time with this. But I just found the very short, choppy sentences, the repetitive nature of the prose, the way that the prose was somehow simultaneously too formal and too chatty, the way that like it felt like it was describing a lot of the characters' physical movements, but I still couldn't place anybody in the scene or in the castle in general. I didn't like that. I really didn't like the way it focused more on what felt like the characters are running around the castle doing absolutely nothing, as opposed to focusing on the psychological aspect, which is what I want in a starvation fever dream book. I want to focus on their minds and what's happening to their minds as their bodies start to fall apart, as the situation in the castle becomes dangerous and untenable, as they all start to starve. And instead, again, you just get a very physical book, a book that is a lot about people walking around the castle, having conversations, never getting any closer to figuring out what is going on until the very end, when it's info dumped at you, and it's like, that explanation was cool, and I actually really enjoyed where like the magic was coming from and like the kind of magic that was happening in the book. But I wish that had been seeded throughout the story, as opposed to just being told to you in this huge exposition dump at the end. And I also didn't think, again, the pacing and the plot was constructed very well. It was, again, just a lot of the characters standing around doing nothing until the very end, when everything happens all at once. And then also, I couldn't really feel, again, this sense of stakes and danger and tension that I really want to feel when reading a castle under siege, we're all gonna starve book. Because, spoilers, but around 50% of the way into the book, one of the POVs literally just finds a way out of the castle and is able to easily leave the castle. And not only that, she chooses to go back into the castle. And it's like, that completely wrecked my sense of like claustrophobia and the feeling that we're stuck inside this castle, like under siege with these women. The fact that she could just leave. She just left. She just left and she went back. And I get that it's because she wants to personally get revenge against Sir Voin for like ruining her family's life or whatever, but that motivation didn't feel strong enough for me, and it really felt like you're free and she's gonna starve to death in this castle. Like, what? Leave. Just leave. She's gonna die. So I don't know. I didn't feel particularly attached to any of the characters. I didn't really root for any of those relationships. I didn't find myself, you know, on bated breath waiting to figure out what the heck was going on in this castle, because again, it still felt like no matter how much the characters walked around and investigated, we just weren't learning anything. And then I hated the writing style. So it was a lot of stuff that on paper should have worked for me, and then the way that was done just did not work at all for me. But again, I knew I wasn't gonna like this book like 5 pages in. If you are 5 pages in and you still like this book, I would keep going. And I'm interested in reading more from Caitlin Starling. I want to read The Luminous Dead, which I have seen at my library. So that one I just have to bring up because it was one of my least favorite books I read this month and one of the most disappointing books I read this month. I can take a bad book, I can take reading a book that I'm just like, this isn't very good. And it's not horrible, it's just, you know, not exactly what I wanted and what I was expecting, but the disappointment. Again, just having it be so perfect on paper and then in practice just be so bad to me. It really, really disappointed me. So there's The Starving Saints. And then I also want to talk about After the Forest by Kel Woods. This is a book that I had never heard of before. Someone put it on hold at the library and I thought the cover looked interesting, so I was like reading the inside flap. And it is a what happened after Hansel and Gretel retelling, and I love stories like that. That's why Bitter Blue by Kristen Cashore is one of my favorite books of all time, because I just love a good like what happens after we kill the evil king, what happens after the fairy tale, how does that psychologically impact those characters, especially child characters who go through these fairy tales, these horrible things, how does that impact them into adulthood? I find it really fascinating, and I think there's a lot of, again, allegory you can do for like child abuse and stuff like that, and I find that all really fascinating. And so I put it on hold and got it after that patron had it, and I was again really disappointed in this one because on paper I love that idea. What if Gretel becomes a what if Gretel, you know, took the witch's spell book and became like a baker and makes magic gingerbread in order to keep her and Hans afloat, and Hans is just like this total degenerate, drunken, gambling mess after what has happened to them. And how, you know, how do they deal with that? How do they live in their village, you know, Gretel being seen as a witch and Hans, you know, just completely falling apart and being unable to keep himself together. That concept I love, and that was so interesting to me, and that's why like it really caught me off guard when about halfway through this novel it becomes, not even halfway, probably like 30 or 40% of the way through, it becomes a werewolf bear shifter romance. Like it just completely shifts gears and turns into a romance about wolf and bear shifters fighting, and it's kind of a Snow White retelling too. And like we completely drop the Hansel and Gretel bit. She barely makes any gingerbread. We don't really address their childhood trauma and how it has impacted them into adulthood. That the few times we did were again my favorite parts of the book because I enjoy that commentary so much. And it was just not what I was expecting it to be. Again, not what I wanted from this book. And again, like it felt like it was giving me what I wanted in like the first 30%, and then just as soon as this guy comes in, I'm like, uh-oh, where are we going with this? And it just completely swapped gears. So pick this up if you're looking for a shifter romance. Maybe don't pick it up if you're looking for a Hansel and Gretel retelling or, you know, reimagining. The worst part is the romance wasn't even good. Like, I just was really pissed off at the love interest. It's like she's only attracted to him because he's a hot mountain man, and like there's so many miscommunications from them, and not even like the kind that you can understand, like, oh, I get why she would, you know, think he doesn't care about her, whatever. Like it's literally just the most annoying juvenile kind of miscommunication where she sees him do something that could be totally innocuous, like he hugs another woman or something, she freaks out, is like, he never loved me, and like runs away, and the situation totally snowballs because she refuses to talk to him. Like it was just so annoying. I couldn't do it. Then I also want to talk about, back to back, Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson and Alphabet of Thorn by Patricia A. McKillop. I wanted to read Sorcery of Thorns because I had just read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and I did not expect to like that book because I went into it knowing exactly what it was. It's like a YA fantasy romance about, you know, a 17-year-old girl and the 1,000-year-old fairy prince who falls in love with her. And it's like, that's so totally not my thing. But I think I ended up enjoying it because I knew exactly what it was when I went into it, that it was gonna be that. That I just needed a really short, fluffy, fun, doesn't take itself too seriously book that had fall vibes, because it was October and it was still very hot where I lived, and I was in the fall mood, but it was not that. I just wanted something that would give me fall vibes, get me in the fall atmosphere, and that book did that very well. It's like, because he's like the Fae Prince of Autumn or whatever. So, and I found that the world and the underlying themes of that book were way more thoughtful and way more intriguing than I anticipated going in. And I actually found it to be like kind of a really interesting metaphor for marriage. Like in this world, they all live basically in the Fae realm, that there's like mortals who live in the Fae realm, and romance between Fae and the humans is illegal, but they can become Fae by drinking from this magic well. But Fae basically can't do any kind of craft work, so like they can't paint, they can't cook, they can't do anything that's not like magical or just raw ingredients. And So when you become Fae, you have to completely give up any of those craft abilities, but you get to be like with the one you love or whatever. So I found that to be so interesting, and the way that the main character is a painter. She paints portraits, and so she falls in love with this Fae prince, but she does not want to turn into a Fae. She doesn't want to, the solution is like, okay, let's just go to the well and drink from the well and it'll be all good. But she doesn't want to do that because she doesn't want to give up her painting ability. And so I kind of felt like that was an allegory for marriage. Like, for the idea that you don't want to completely give up what makes you you and your hobbies and your interests just for love. And I found that to be, again, surprisingly thoughtful and deep underlying message to the story that at first kind of just seems, again, like a very silly Fae romance. So I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was. I mean, it's not like An Enchantment of Ravens is not, a perfect book or a favorite book by any means, but like I enjoyed it for what it was. And so I wanted to read Sorcery of Thorns because that seemed much more up my alley. It's still YA, but it's kind of like a darker, moodier, gas lamp fantasy type book about an orphan who grows up in a magic library and then is like accused of murder and is taken to the like capital city to stand trial for murder, and starts to figure out that like someone is trying to attack the libraries, the libraries themselves are kind of maybe not exactly what they seem to be. And so I was really intrigued in that premise. One of my favorite series as a child, as a young adult, was the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix, and one of the protagonists of those books, Lyriel, grew up also in like a magic library. She grew up among these like sightseers, but she couldn't sightsee, so she became like a magic librarian, and I love that. I'm a librarian, in case you can't tell. And so I love that concept. I love any kind of fantasy book that has to do with magic books and libraries and stuff, so I thought this would be way up my alley. So I got that book out from the library, and then I noticed someone recommended another book on Reddit, Alphabet of Thorn by Patricia McKillip, that kind of has basically a very similar plot premise as Sorcery of Thorns. They have almost the same name, and the premise of Alphabet of Thorn is that there's this magic orphan, there's this random orphan who was left in a library. She was brought up in this library that houses a bunch of magical texts. There's a magic school like right next to it, and she kind of gets drawn into translating this magic book that is told in the Alphabet of Thorn, and we are also learning what's in the text, this like ancient history of this very powerful sorcerer and king who like conquered the lands. And you learn how the orphan girl, the protagonist of Penth, connects to that. So those are very similar premises, so I got that book from the library as well. So I thought I would really like Sorcerer of Thorns, and I just didn't. I think it was because it was trying to be a little bit more complex than An Enchantment of Ravens, which is basically just like a walking sim, the book equivalent of a video game walking simulator. It's just like the characters walking around falling in love. And this book was trying to be very plot heavy, very twisty, very intrigue, and like very much political intrigue and like figuring out this magic secret. And I didn't think it really did any of that well. I felt like the plot was just a lot of alternating between them doing absolutely nothing, chilling at home, and just very frantic, frenetic, like action chase scenes. And like the characters are kind of dumbasses because they try to do the same thing over and over again, even after it has not worked and gotten them into a lot of trouble. And they're just like, let's just try it again. Surely this time he won't beat us and get one over us. It's like, are you guys dumb? And you can't even say that, okay, well, they're just teenagers, because Nathaniel, the male lead of this book, is like 18 or 19, and he's been like seemingly running his family and like playing the political game since his entire family died a couple years ago. He also has like an ancient demon servant with him who should be giving him better advice, so I digress. I also didn't really like the romance in this one. I feel like 17 and 10,000-year-old Fae Prince is so much more acceptable to me than 16 and 18, because 16 and 18 is just too real, you know? Like 17 and Fae Prince, like they act convincingly the same age in that book. He doesn't act like an ancient immortal fairy prince. He acts like a 17-year-old boy. And she's pretty mature for her age. She's been, living in Fae, conniving these Fae into leaving her alone for years. It's like they feel pretty even. And especially how the story ends. They feel pretty even in their power and in like how they interact with each other. But like 16 and 18, I don't really like that. They're just at such different stages in their lives, especially within the context of the book. Like I get that in fantasy, oftentimes 14-year-olds have gone through things that, mature them way beyond 14. But like in this book in particular, it felt like it kept being stressed how naive and innocent Elizabeth was, having grown up in the library with no other people her age around. So like she did not understand social norms, she didn't understand romance, she didn't understand how to talk to people, and she is completely at Nathaniel's mercy in the story. She's literally his prisoner at one point because he's the one who's transporting her from the library to the city to stand trial. And then at a certain point, everyone else in the city is against her and literally thinks she's crazy, and she's like on the run from like being locked up in an asylum. And so it's like, if she didn't have him, she would literally be like homeless and on the street and like murdered. Like it's just, she's so dependent on him, and she is so naive, and it keeps being emphasized how innocent and naive she is. Whereas Nathaniel is 18, he has been running his family again, and he's been the head of household for his family for years, since his entire family was murdered, and he has been running the household and like going to parties and has had relationships with men and women. I don't understand why at a certain point it just became like very casual to make the male lead bisexual. Like, I agree, it's hot to make a man bisexual, that's the hottest thing a man can be, but like, really interesting. When did that start being a thing, where we just slide in that the male lead has had relationships with men in the past? I mean, it's kind of fun, right? I did like that, but but he has had relationships in the past. He's experienced in romantic and social and political avenues, and so it just felt like there was such a gap between them. It never even felt like their interactions were romantic to me because of that kind of gap and distance between them, and it always just felt like friend vibes to me, mentor-mentee vibes. I felt like they both had way more chemistry with Silas, their demon butler, and it felt like they were both way more into Silas than they were into each other. And so I was like, I kind of wish that it had been a throuple, or that at least like we had explored that dynamic between the three of them. Like, it's kind of like and friendship or platonic love ends up saving the day at the end, but then like, why do we even need the romance between Elizabeth and Nathaniel? Because it's just so it's such a miss for me. I really didn't like that. But then I read Alphabet of Thorns by Patricia McKillip, and I've only read one other book at that time by Patricia McKillip, which is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld, and I liked that book. I thought it was objectively good, but I just felt no like strong feelings towards it. It's a book that purposefully keeps the reader at quite a distance because there's kind of this secret that the main character is not letting you in on, and so I think it would benefit from a reread. But at that point I was just like, let's see what Patricia McKillip has. I'm not familiar with her game. I loved Alphabet of Thorn. Probably one of my favorite books I've read this year, at least this month. Like, I just really enjoyed that book. The way that the two timelines intersected was so crazy, and it was something I was not anticipating at all. And then when I figured out where it was going, I was like, no way. Like, it can't be. We can't be doing that. And then it happened, and I was so gagged. That's the only way I could describe me reading this book. Gagged. I really enjoyed this one. I also really like how in this book she kind of subverts a lot of these typical YA fantasy tropes. Like, there's the magical princess and the, you know, love triangle and the mysterious orphan girl, and like, it felt like a lot of those tropes were being turned on their head or played with in interesting ways. Like, something I loved about this story was that the main character, Nepenthe, has grown up in this library, and she, unlike Elizabeth, actually does have other people her age there, and she is friends with this guy Laidley, I think is how you say his name, and he has a crush on her. She's aware of this. Like, it's very obvious that he likes her romantically, and she doesn't really feel the same way. And then she meets this other guy, Born, from the wizard school, and they enter into a romantic relationship, and Laidley is kind of like, what the hell? And I feel like in any other story it would be so easy to make Laidley like creepy and weird and like the bad guy, and he would, you know, have a third act twist where like he's helping the villains or something. But no, he's just like, he kind of just becomes their friend, and it's just like this unspoken fact that like, yeah, he kind of has a crush on Nepenthe, but like, he also values her as a human being and as a friend, and like kind of gets roped in on their schemes and like their translating business. And I thought that was really cute. Like, I loved that. I loved that Laidley just like became part of the squad instead of becoming evil and like being, you know, the secondary love interest or whatever. Like, I enjoyed that. I felt like it was, again, a nice subversion. I also really love the themes in here around women being erased from history and history in general being erased and not being aware of, but also how the work of the historians and the translators and the archaeologists and the wizards was able to restore women to history, or history in general. And the themes around motherhood and love and sacrifice and, you know, devoting your entire life to someone or something at the expense of being your own person and having your own wants and desires. I don't know. I just really love this story. I really love the characters. I love the writing style. It was so lyrical and beautiful. The plot, again, just like I loved how it all connected. It feels like at first that it's kind of a bunch of different characters who don't seem to have much to do with each other, but then it all comes together in a really, really satisfying way for me. I feel like a book like this really hinges on how well it all comes together, and this book I thought just came together beautifully. So really like this. It's not even fair to compare Sorcery of Thorns and Alphabet of Thorn because like they're not even on the same plane. But yeah, let me just say that Alphabet of Thorn was better. And then while I'm talking about it, let me talk about the rest of the Patricia McKillop books I read, because I loved Alphabet of Thorn so much that I went and like read everything else that I could find at my library system by her. So I read The Bell at Sealy Head, Odd Magic, and The Bards of Bone Plain as well from her, and they were all still like good and still very charming, and she has a beautiful writing style, and her books are fairly short and all have some sort of interesting magical mystery element, so I didn't dislike them and I enjoyed the experience of reading them, but none of the other books really reached the high of Alphabet of Thorn for me. It felt like they didn't have as satisfying of an ending, and it felt like whereas Alphabet of Thorn really, again, really strongly wove, it has a very big ensemble cast, but each of those ensemble cast members are subverting something, and then they all are woven together so well in the end, and I just didn't feel like the other books did that. I think probably ranking them, my second favorite would be Odd Magic, and then Bards, Odd, and then Bella, then Bards. Bell at Sealy Head is very short and very like almost Jane Austen-esque, which just like a lot of like day-to-day life in this like small village, but Bards of Bone Plain I felt more than anything else just kind of had too much going on in it. So it's really like, would I rather be bored or would I rather feel like there's a lot of miscellaneous bullshit going on? And I guess I would rather be bored. So there's my opinions on those. I also went on a Rachel Hartman kick this month. I noticed at my library they have a new book out from her called Among Ghosts, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the Seraphina series when I was a kid. It's been a really long time since I read it. I barely remember anything, but I remember enjoying it, and that was one of the first books I can remember reading that talks about gender and about like indigenous systems of gender that aren't binary. And so, I mean, that kind of carries on into Among Ghosts. If you've read it, you know it's kind of not a secret, but it's something that is slowly revealed to you as the story goes on, and I really liked that. I like that it wasn't treated like a secret or like a plot twist, but it's just kind of like something you learn more about as the story progresses and you learn what's going on. I liked how the book dealt with these really dark themes like child abuse and domestic abuse and transphobia and the cost of violence and like having to live and atone for what you've done. I liked those themes, and I felt like they were done really well. Like, they weren't shied away from, but also it felt like it was never too much for a YA book, which, comparing it to something like Noundell, which I also enjoyed but felt like at times it got really, really graphic for a YA novel, I felt like Among Ghosts did a much better job at that. And then I went and read Tess of the Road and In the Serpent's Wake, which is a duology. It's kind of like a sequel to the Seraphina series, but you don't need to remember anything, which I didn't, so that was good. And I really like Tess of the Road, which is kind of this very character-focused story about Tess, who is Seraphina's younger sister. She's like 10 years younger, and she had something traumatic happen to her as a young teenager and has kind of been coping in very self-destructive ways that make everyone around her kind of, you know, tired of her. And so one day she hits her breaking point. She sets off the road with one of her friends from her childhood, and it's all about her journey and her coming to forgive herself and you know, reclaim herself and her body and like learn to love life again and like pursue her passions and like not feel so locked into what she feels like society tells her she has to do as a woman, what her family tells her she has to do as a woman. And I really liked it. I felt like it's a very not plot focused story. Again, it's very character focused. It's all about Tess and her journey and her internal journey, and I really enjoyed it. Again, it felt like it hit all of these really tough topics in a very, you know, frank way, but without being too over the top for YA. Tess is just such a strong character, such a lovely character to follow. Her relationship, her friendships are really, again, great to follow. Seeing her unlearn shame and like be truly able to just like live with herself and want to live again and look forward to the days ahead was so beautiful. I did kind of struggle with the healing romance that comes in at the end. It's more kind of like a friends with benefits situation. Like, I think we're meant to know that they have love for each other, but they're not really in love, and kind of they have what they have and then it's over and they're both okay with that. But it's with a man who is 10 years older than her, and who the relationship happens while she is 17 and they sleep together. You know, it's like a situationship, like friends with benefits thing. And it's like, I like the idea of having a relationship like that, especially as kind of like a healing from sexual assault type narrative, like learning to love your body and learning that sex is not the enemy and you can have, you know, pleasurable and healthy sex with people. It doesn't always have to be like that. But when she's 17 and with a man who is 27, like, that's just a lot, right? Like, that's just a little too much. He's Serafina's friend, and that's why I think he has to be 10 years older than her. Like, it's a way to get Serafina back into the story. But I feel like there were so many other ways you could do that. And then, like, if you're going to have that gap, I think you need to address it, and you need to have them have a conversation about it and have them be like, you know, you're 10 years older than me, but like, I feel like we are maturity level on the same page, and I don't feel like I'm being taken advantage of. Like, I needed them to have a conversation about it, and they never did. It's only talked about after the relationship's already over, and in a very joking, frivolous way. Like, she makes a stupid joke or like says something silly, and he's like, sometimes I forget that like I've been sleeping with a, you know, 18-year-old, but not this time. And she's like, actually I'm 17. And he's like, that's not great. And it's like, yeah, it's not. So why were you having sex with her for like months? It's just I didn't like it being there in the first place. Then being treated as a joke was really weird, especially when otherwise the book is so cognizant of relationship dynamics and trying to, you know, portray and champion healthy relationship dynamics. And just to throw this one in there and act like it's like perfect and healthy and like, you know, exactly what she needed to recover, and then not address the elephant in the room. That was weird. But that was the only thing I didn't like about Test of the Road. In The Serpent's Wake, it's not bad. It's really not bad, but it's not bad. It's good for a YA book, whereas I thought Test of the Road was just good in general. In The Serpent's Wake, it really becomes more plot focused and a lot broader in scope and focus. It has 4 POVs, and I just didn't think that these characters were the characters we needed to tell this story, or that these characters really like embodied these themes. Like, it felt like she kind of started with the themes she wanted to talk about, which is like settler colonialism, indigenous self-determination, white saviorism, and worked backwards to figure out how she could get Tess involved in that, and how the kind of plot from the first book could carry over into that plot. And it just doesn't work for me. It again becomes very plot focused and not very emotionally focused, and there's a choice made at the beginning of the second book that really cuts off a lot of the emotional avenues and a lot of the emotional development we could have had in this book, and I didn't really approve of that choice, because what it leaves is plot and the themes that the characters, who are all white people from the like empire, like the colonial lands, don't really feel that involved in. It's all about kind of learning how to be a good ally, but it feels like they never learn. They bumble around making mistakes with good intentions, and then someone else from that culture comes to them and is like, don't do that, do this instead, very bluntly. They apologize, they're so sorry about it, and then they just make another mistake. Like, it's just this cycle, and it doesn't ever feel like they really learn anything or feel like these characters were the right characters to tell a story about colonialism, because they're all, again, colonizers. And, you know, maybe that's the point, but I don't know. It just was really weird. It was like, why tell a story like this from the perspective of these 4 characters who have nothing to do with the lands that are trying to free themselves? It was just weird. It felt like, again, it just went in a really different direction. It had a much broader, shallower focus, and the themes were very blunt and repetitive, and which, I mean, is fine for YA, but it just is much less interesting to me personally, because I'm an adult and I've already read books about colonialism and how to be a good ally and indigenous self-determinism, and I just didn't feel like I needed the way this book was talking about it. But like, I would give this to a teenager. It's like, it's not this book's fault that I'm an adult and I don't like YA. You know, it's a YA book. So I don't know. Test of the Road, really good, but I would say only continue on if you're really, really interested in the serpent plotline, which, I mean, I kind of wasn't. And I mean, even the serpent plotline feels like it gets really shafted in this book. Read the second book if you're interested in these characters being white saviors and being taught not to be, I guess. Okay, then these are 2 more books I want to talk about together. The Road by Cormac McCarthy and The Long Walk by Stephen King. The timeline is kind of funny, so I'm gonna tell it to you. I saw the movie The Long Walk and loved it, because that is generational yaoi. Like, that is crazy. Like, hasn't happened since Challengers. Like, I was locked in on those boys. Of course, you know who I mean. Like, that was so powerful to me. That was really something. I would say I liked the movie. Like, I'm not a really big movie watcher, but I liked the movie. It's short. It's very short and brutal. Like, you're like, oh, okay, so it's about the Vietnam War. And it's about like fascism in general. Like, the basic plot of that movie is like that meme that's like, how to defeat fascism with the power of love. Step 1, learn that you can't defeat fascism with the power of love. Step 2, the power of incredible violence. That's kind of what the movie felt like to me. But I feel like the performers really carry it. David Johnson and Cooper Hoffman are crazy good, and they have insane chemistry, and that bond between their characters is really the heart of the movie and what carried it for me personally. So I was really interested to see how I would feel about the book, because I know it's very different. It has a different ending. They changed a lot. So then I saw the movie, and then I read the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I kind of loved. Like, I loved that book. I could definitely see why other people wouldn't like it, but I just really loved this like unflinchingly dark look at this horrible world, but also like how love made them keep surviving in it, and how they never stopped. Like, they made tough choices and they did bad things sometimes, but they remained fundamentally good at their core. I really loved that, and it really made me think about how, like, I always say, it's like a joke, like, if the zombie apocalypse happens, I'm killing myself. I'm not sticking around. I don't want to live in a survival situation. I don't want to live during the apocalypse. I like air conditioning and Wi-Fi and video games and books, and I'm very weak, and I'm 5 feet tall. Like, I'm not surviving. I'm killing myself immediately. And I feel like this book is like kind of predicted that joke. Like, this book really was like interested in, okay, so when would you? Like, at what point? How bad does it have to be before you would just give up? Before you would just kill yourself? And if you had someone who relied on you, would you struggle on, or would you just say, no, I'm killing them and me, and we're both getting out of here? So that aspect of the book was so interesting to me. I'm like, yeah, maybe I would live to like take care of my cat, but like, at what point is it no longer worth it? And the ending was so sad, but also so like, it's a really interesting ending, and I've seen people take it both ways. People be like, it's a sad ending, like, you should not trust those people that take the boy in, they're gonna do something bad to him. I've seen people say it's a happy ending, like his dad died, but like these other people are nice and are gonna take care of him. I've seen people say it's, all something in the boy's head, or all something that the father makes up as he's like dying, so that he can like believe that his son will be taken care of. Like, really interesting, I think, to have an ending like that and have all these different ways that people have interpreted it. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I want to read more Cormac McCarthy now. And then I read the book The Long Walk. So a lot of books about people walking, especially with Tess of the Road, lots of books about people walking. And this is one of the few occasions where I think the movie kind of was better. I think the movie took the themes and really tightened them up. The book is way more about Ray and his personal journey, whereas the movie, I feel like, is about friendship and love between all of the Musketeers, but in particular between Pete and Ray. And I think that makes it a little bit stronger for me, and makes the ending hit way harder, and makes like all the deaths hit way harder too. I feel like the movie had better pacing. Like, they had to cut, I think, the amount of boys on the walk down from 100 to 50, probably because of budget reasons, but also because, I don't know, that's just a lot. Like, in the book, it's a lot. There's guys, they get down to like the final 7, and there's guys that we have never heard of before. And I feel like that might have been purposeful to like demonstrate how in war you would be fighting against these guys, or fighting with these guys, and you never even knew their names. Like, they die and you just are like, I wonder who that was, or like, that was so-and-so, but we never talked. And I get that, but I just don't think it works super well emotionally. I feel like it hit way harder to be like down to the final 5 in the movie and just like know every one of those boys and like really care about them. I also don't feel any great loss from the characters they did decide to move or combine. I know a lot of people don't like what they did with Stebbins, because he's such a presence in the book and such a big character in the book, and he's pretty secondary in the movie, and I don't really mind. Like, I think he's fun in the book, but again, the book is so much more about the Ray Garrity show, and Stebbins acts as his like mirror slash foil slash evil manic pixie dream girl. He is the dark side of Ray that he has to kind of defeat in order to win and really, become himself. But the movie, again, isn't really about Ray at all. It's about the friendship between the boys. It's about Pete in the end, honestly, and so you kind of don't need Stebbins anymore. And I feel like they worked him back into the story in a way that worked for me personally. He's still weird, he still says odd shit, he still is kind of like the evil manic pixie dream girl, but I love that he just decides to sacrifice himself for Pete and Ray in the end. He's like, you guys just go on. What you have is so beautiful. I'll just bow out. And again, that's related into the way they changed the themes, into the way they changed the kind of focus of the book from being all about Ray and his internal struggle to being about the boys as a whole. And I think that works for a movie especially. Like as a book, we are able to dive so deep into Ray's psyche because he's narrating the book and we get to see his thought patterns spiral as the walk goes on. But in a movie, you can't really show that unless you want to have narration every single second of the movie, which wouldn't be good. Like it's just a different medium. And I think that what they did for the movie worked really well. Okay, another least favorite that we should talk about, Divine Rivals. I was really sad about this one because I feel like it's one of the like romantasy TikTok books that I've never seen a bad review about. Like everybody loves that book, even people who don't normally read romantasy or like really like TikTok books or whatever. I know my friend really likes the books and I did not. I liked it at first and I really liked the world and the characters and kind of like the journalist thing that we were setting up. And then, I don't know, I feel like the book takes a really big turn when they go to the front lines and it took a bad turn in my opinion. Like I feel like the book just really struggled to balance the like war is hell scene with like fluffy teen romance, and I don't think it really achieved a nice balance there. And I also think that like their shotgun teen wedding at the end of the novel is supposed to be like hopeful and like, you know, really cool because they're so in love and supposed to show that like love blooms even in adversity on the battlefield, but it just was way too much. I was off put by that. I thought it was way too soon. I don't know, I just feel like she never convinced me of their relationship development. They go so quickly from being like rivals at day and pen pals at night to being totally in love with each other. I couldn't believe that switch up. I never even felt like we went from rivals to friends, much less rivals to lovers. Like it was just really bizarre. Like even like when they're pen pals, like it felt like they go from we're just, you know, kind of talking to each other because this whole like magic typewriter thing is interesting to you are my best friend, you understand me better than anyone else in the world, and like I really want to meet you in person so fast. And again, I feel like it's because she had to really balance that aspect with the kind of very intense physical real life war stuff, which kind of has to take precedent, right? Like you kind of have to write about the war stuff instead of the magic typewriter stuff. But it just didn't work for me. And then I always love when a book grows a plot on the literal last page of the novel. But I still just wasn't interested enough to read the sequel. I probably won't. I mean, I couldn't take her calling him her husband in like the last 10 pages. I can't take that for an entire novel. Like it really icked me out. Sorry. I feel so bad because again, I feel like this is such a widely beloved book, and like even people who again typically don't like romantasy or like TikTok books in general really love this book, and I did not. Okay, then I also kind of want to talk about this book too. A romance book that I did like, Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed, and then the sequel, which I don't remember what it's called. I never marked it as read because I didn't read like the last 5 pages. But I think it's called like The Lowkey or something. But I started reading this book because I knew that there's gonna be a TV show about it, and the actors are pulling out, you know, RPF bait, the likes of which we haven't seen since Scum season 2, season 3. So I had to tap in. I had to see what the book was about. And kind of the most bizarre book I've ever read. Like there's 3 pages in, there's a sex scene. There's a sex scene in basically every chapter. There is no plot to this book. It is basically just like scenes from a secret relationship. But yet, she kind of put the secret sauce into there. I was kind of obsessed with them by the end of the book and really cared about them and their relationship. And, you know, All for the Game has ruined me for sports related books because I kept expecting the Mafia to show up, but they don't. The end of the book was kind of depressing to me, honestly. Like the fact that they're just like, I guess we'll just keep our relationship a secret until we retire, which like I'm the best at hockey ever, so that's probably not gonna be for like 10-20 years. That made me sad. I feel like at the beginning of Heated Rivalry, I was like, this is so dumb, I don't care about this, like this writing is crazy, they're fucking on every page, like there's a lot going on here. And then by the end of the book, I was totally sold. I was like, I love them, like I need to see what happens with them, like these are my children who kiss each other. Let's cut that part out. And then with the sequel, I started out like, oh my gosh, these are my my favorites. I love them. Like, this is so great. You know, they're perfect together. And then by the end of the story, I was like, this sucks. I feel like the sequel, she got notes that was like, there's no plot, add a plot. And then kind of took it in a really weird direction. Like, okay, if Chekhov's coming out, like, you know that if there is a story in which the characters are in the closet, they're gonna get outed by the end of the story. Where, like, the major conflict is that they're in the closet. They're gonna get outed by the end of the story. So I kept waiting the whole book for that to happen and getting so scared at every turn in which it seemed like they were gonna get outed. And I feel like she just escalated it to a ridiculous point where it just, like, there were so many opportunities for them to get caught and have it make sense. And then what she chooses instead is, like, just bizarre and, like, doesn't feel realistic. And also, why did his plane almost crash? That was also crazy. Like, it just felt like it really jumped the gun or jumped the shark and, like, became unrealistic in a way that I couldn't ignore, as opposed to unrealistic in, like, a way that it's like, this is a romance novel and things aren't realistic. So, like, I never even finished the book. I'm literally 94% of the way through and I'm like, I think that's enough. But I'll still be sad for the show when it comes out, because I'm like, how are they gonna turn that into a show? It would be basically porn. So I'm very interested to see what they do with that. Let's talk about this really quick. I read more of the Vorkosigan saga. I read Miles Mystery and Mayhem and Miles Errant, which is like 6 books of the series. The Miles Mystery and Mayhem is fun because it has Ethan of Athos, which is about a guy from a planet of gays. And he has to go find the fetuses that the gays have ordered that got lost. So kind of crazy and fun. That book I felt like was all about reproductive power and like how people manage reproduction, which was interesting. Miles isn't really in that book at all. It's mostly side quests from other characters, which, I mean, I still really enjoyed them. And then Miles Errant is what I really loved because it's revealed in this book that Miles has a secret evil clone twin, which I don't know if that's like common knowledge and I've been living under a rock, but I had no idea about that. And it really tickled me. I really enjoyed that as a plot development, especially because like Bujold and Miles take it so seriously. They're like, we gotta save this guy. I really like the questions about nature and nurture and like how you could even form your own identity and live your own life if you were brought up like Mark was. How he is not Miles, but like he still is kind of crazier and smarter than like 70% of the population, even though he's not quite at Miles's height, and how Miles's intelligence and kind of his ability, his charisma, his ability to make everybody do what he wants doesn't really come from genes. It comes from his life experiences and his parents and his upbringing, which I thought was really interesting. And then also kind of the hint that, like, okay, the book edges into like torture porn territory at the end, which is one of my least favorite things about it. One of the things that I didn't really like about it. It is really graphic on-page torture and sexual assault. And then we kind of really brush over the healing process. It's kind of just told like, okay. And then he went to therapy and he became okay with what happened to him and gets a manic pixie dream girl girlfriend as his prize. So it's okay. But then it's also kind of one of the coping mechanisms Mark forms while he's being tortured is like his personality essentially splits and he develops, what is it called? Dissociative identity disorder. And it's kind of implied, I mean, it's treated as the real disorder. Like he maintains those personalities after the torture, the traumatic event is over, but like they kind of don't come out anymore because there's no trauma to be responded to, but they still kind of exist within him. And it's like suggested or at least implied that, what is he called? Admiral Naismith, which is like Miles's alter ego, is kind of also a split personality disorder, like a dissociative identity that Miles has to take on to cope with his life. And that if he ever couldn't pose as Admiral Naismith anymore, he would have like a complete mental breakdown because he needs that as a coping mechanism, which I thought was really interesting. And I think a lot of books wouldn't explore kind of how fucked up like Miles is and like how he does have deep-seated insecurities and like traumas and like coping mechanisms that may or may not be positive or beneficial. So I enjoyed that as well. I also read To Clutch a Razor by Victoria Roth, which is the sequel to When Among Crows, which was such a pleasant surprise to me. Like I loved that book. It's like a little novella and I was so surprised. Like it takes a surprising turn in the middle, let's say. I went into it thinking it was one thing and it turned out to actually be another, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I liked it. I thought it was very fun. And so I read the sequel, When Among Crows, which just recently came out. And I really enjoyed it too. I thought this was better than the first book. I see a lot of people in the Storygraph reviews being like, it's not as good as book 1, but it was fine. I completely disagree. I thought it was better. I thought the plot was tighter and more interesting. I thought the characters were more deep and more interesting. I really liked that we see the relationships develop, and I also liked that Ala, I think that's her name. I also liked that Ala wasn't just like completely dropped from this story, because the first book kind of pulls a bait and switch where you think Ala is the main character and then it turns out to actually be Demeter. And Demeter, I don't know. And then, so I really was afraid that she was going to be dropped in this story, but she stays a main character, she stays a POV, and like her drama from the first book is dealt with and explored. I felt like there were a lot of really interesting questions, again, around guilt and kind of familial trauma and like learning your family aren't the people you think they are, like learning that these people who you love so much have caused so much hurt to other people, in like kind of not knowing how to cope or deal with that, which I think a lot of religious people or people with, you know, very conservative parents who are very liberal themselves can relate to. And it's all packed into like such a short novel, and it's like 240 pages. So I don't know, I really enjoyed this. I thought it improved a lot on the first book in terms of character work and plot, pacing, and tension. Yeah, I would read like 10 more books set in this series. To me, this is kind of like Cemeteries of Amalo, where it's just like kind of a fun little side series where the world building is good, the characters are interesting. There's a gay little romance for me to get invested in, but like they don't take up too much attention or brain power. So don't go into this expecting masterpiece, but I personally really enjoy this series and have a lot of fun with it. And to finish off, we will talk about Ursula K. Le Guin's 5 Ways to Forgiveness. The way that I ended up talking about basically every book I read anyways, and this video is just as long, but whatever. Ursula K. Le Guin's 5 Ways to Forgiveness. I really loved the short story collection, and I loved Nnedi Okorafor's introduction, which talks about how Le Guin kind of like throws you into books as a traveler in a foreign country. You're kind of just dropped into this world and like left to sink or swim. You kind of have to figure out it on your own. You're not infoed to or explained to, and I love that about her. I love that style of world building. It's something that I always enjoy. It's something that I prefer to like Sanderson style like info dumps about like every aspect of the world and its economy and like flora and fauna, stuff like that. I love that she doesn't hold your hand. I love that she treats you like a traveler, like somebody who's going to explore the world and find it out naturally by yourself, as opposed to a tourist who needs their hand held and like needs to be led through the world because, you know, you're only going to be there for 2 weeks and then you're going to leave forever. Like her worlds are so rich and like so lived in and feel so, again, like you just want to explore them. So you kind of emotionally feel what her worlds are about. And at the end of the book, you're rewarded with a little like supplemental glossary, like then you get to learn the facts and like the history. There are no horses on Yoe. Like it's just such a, like those facts I think in a lot of modern fantasy would just be told to the reader in like big paragraphs right when you enter the story. I'm sorry, I'm like fighting the light. But I love that in this book, you're not told that within the story, you experience the world through the people living their lives in it, and then at the very end of the story, if you choose to do so, you can read all the fun supplemental factual material about it. So I don't know, Le Guin never misses. And speaking of Le Guin, the Ursula K. Le Guin award recipient was announced, and it was Ragsfall by Roger Chandrasekhara, which I have a whole video up about this award. I loved Ragsfall. It was my favorite book I read from the nominees, and I'm so happy that it won because I do think it's my favorite, but also the best of the nominees. I would have also been happy if Andrea Hairston won with Archangels of Funk or Ursula Witcher won with North Continent Ribbon, which is on my shelf, but I loved Ragsfall. I'm very happy with that. So we're finally done, and it still took an hour to film. So give me 1 book to talk about and I'll yap for an hour. Give me 30 books to talk about and I'll yap for an hour. Like it's just, I can't stop myself. I love to talk. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. Tell me what you've been reading in October, what you're looking forward to reading in November, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.